get going, Heidi.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to our second Lunch and Learn session of Together4Tech. For those that don't know, Together4Tech, this is an initiative focused on engaging male allies, women in tech, because we know that men are critical advocates to help women in the workplace. And a key focus of this initiative is allyship. And that means helping men to support women in their careers. We began this very important discussion back in October with a Lunch and Learn session moderated by my colleague Nathan. And that theme was men learning from women, promoting gender inclusivity in tech. Today's session is going to further explore one of the key barriers to effectively supporting women in tech, implicit bias. Okay, so next slide. Okay. It's a privilege to be moderating today's panel in this very important conversation. Probably the most important things you probably need to know about me in this regard today are that I am a woman in tech. I'm actually a retired CIO from USAA. The Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, some of you may know who she was. She actually invented the compiler back in 1952. And in case you're wondering, that was before I was born. But most importantly, she inspired me to pursue a career in tech, in STEM, when I met her in the early 1980s. It's also interesting to note, I am a native Detroiter. I earned both my bachelor's and my executive MBA, along with my varsity letter at Michigan State. Go Green. Okay. So our goal for this session, next slide, today is to learn how to interrupt bias in subtle dynamics in the workplace. Next slide. So a couple of rules of engagement as we get started. We do have a chat session open. This will be monitored throughout this event. And at the end of the session, we do ask if you give us your feedback so we can continue to improve these very important sessions. With that, let's go to the next slide, and it's time to introduce our amazing panelists today. In the order that you see on the screen, we'll start with Rich. Rich, can you say a few words about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm good to be here, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm recently retired, well, a year ago retired from Ford Motor Company, so I'm an alum of Ford. And there was responsible for what it shows here, the mobility and basically connected vehicle solutions that we put together. Worked in a lot of different areas before that, but that was the most recent responsibility that I had. And I was part of, maybe I can't see it, but a part of the Ford Ally for Women's program in my area. So that's me.
Thank you, Rich. Ryan?
Hi, everyone. Privileged to be joining you today and joining such a great panel that we have and some other esteemed colleagues. So Ryan Talbott, I'm the Global CIO at BorgWarner. I've been with the organization for around 3.5 years and served in both consulting and in industry roles prior to this. So nice to be with you all today.
Thank you, Ryan. Sangy?
Hi, everybody. This is Sangy Vatsa. I'm the Global Chief Technology and Digital Officer of HTC Global Services, based and headquartered in Troy, and really thrilled to be part of this panel, learning from my peers, and this important topic of men learning how to support women in tech. It's a huge topic, a high priority topic, and also huge thanks, Heidi, to you for hosting this, and big shout out to MCWT for doing an amazing job helping women in tech. So glad to be here.
Thank you. And Michael?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Zlonkevich. I'm a program manager from Brooksource. We're an IT professional services provider, and a focus of my role is helping leaders hire. And being here today among these highly accomplished executives and leaders, in no way can I claim to be an expert in this space, but I am someone who is early in career. I'm passionate about this work. I think rising the tides lifts all ships. And I'm eager as someone to help make the world a better place for our coworkers, our sisters, our daughters, our mothers, and so on. So excited to be part of the discussion today, humbled for the opportunity, and excited to learn on how to be a better ally. And I'm a Wolverine, so go blue.
Go Michigan, right?
Go Michigan.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Let's take us to our next slide. A quick walkthrough of the program. The focus is on implicit bias. We'll be talking about what it is and why it matters. We should have some time at the end of this discussion for some Q&A and for some open sharing. We'll then spend the last few minutes. I'll turn things over to Tammy, and she'll tell us a little bit more about MCWT and what's on the radar. So let's get started. Next slide. Implicit bias, what is it and why does it matter? I want to thank NCWIT, National Council for Women in Information Technology, and their amazing research staff for providing the data that we'll be discussing today. I've had the privilege of collaborating with NCWIT for many years now. They provided tremendous support as I stood up USAA's very first diversity and inclusion group, Aspire, to encourage and support women in IT to realize their full potential over a dozen years ago. Next slide. So it's important that we clarify why we are doing this. I believe whether we're Spartans or Wolverines, that we all know that the tech world lacks diversity. Now, I'm not going to take the time today to review all of the dismal data. It's a little dismal, or why this is the case. But I will say that we are making some progress, but much more work remains. I'm going to tell you this. If we can mute everyone, I'm hearing some background noise. But what I will tell you is this. When I was a student at Michigan State over 40 years ago, the percentage of women studying computer science engineering was over 30%. Today, it is less than 12%. Just think about that for a moment. Over 40 years ago, it was over 30%. Today, it is somewhere in that 12% range. We can and we must do better. And that is exactly what MCWT is all about. Next slide. But there is some great news. There's some very good news. I can assure you, we know how to fix this. I don't know if we have the will to fix it, but we have the knowledge to fix it. And there are really two key factors that are critical to improving diversity and inclusion in our workplace. The first of those factors is institutional accountability. The entire organization needs to be accountable for this. Not only do we need institutional accountability, but it needs to be supported by top leadership. Once we have that in place, the second factor is improving managerial relationships. Frontline managers have more contact with the entire organization than any other leaders in the organization. So focus on improving institutional accountability and managerial relationships. Once those are in place, we can then begin to address this broader ecosystem of diversity and inclusion. And one of those focus areas is the reduction of biases and barriers. Next slide. So what is implicit bias? Implicit bias refers to attitudes, prejudices, judgments, all of that. It refers to our attitudes and judgments towards people, or when we associate stereotypes with people without our conscious knowledge. We often hear implicit bias referred to as unconscious bias for precisely that reason, without our conscious knowledge. And it turns out that implicit bias is the key barrier to effectively supporting women in tech. So we're going to explore this a little bit further. We're going to talk about how it works, what causes societal bias, how we can interrupt bias in the subtle dynamics in the workplace. And as we continue with this, spoiler alert, we are all biased, every one of us. Okay, so the screen that you're looking at right now, this is from the Project Implicit run by Harvard University. This test, this implicit association test, this has been taken by thousands of people over the past 2 decades. And this test demonstrates that the majority of the population has slight to strong automatic associations of science with male and masculinity. Okay. Now, many of us here today have taken the test. Most of our panelists, I believe, have taken it. I can tell you that what you see on the screen, these are not my test results, but mine look very similar to this. Okay. And I share that with you. This conversation is not about intent or blame. We all share these biases because we are all people. Okay. So the next slide. This is my favorite slide in the presentation. So what do we mean when we say society has biases about science, tech, and gender? Well, in this case, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm not sure how many people in this audience are aware of this, but back in 2013, Mattel, the creator of the Barbie doll, they actually published a computer engineer Barbie book. And this book tells the readers, keeping in mind the target audience for this book are young girls. It literally tells the readers that they need boys to code for them. Okay. If anyone actually has a copy of this book, I'd like to buy it from you. I do not have a copy. I need to add this to my D&I collection. This was in 2013. So by the way, this image that we're looking at, this is from Feminist Hacker Barbie. A group of people saw this book. They were enraged. They created this website in response to this book. And if you actually go to this website, I put the URL on the screen, you'll be compelled, you'll literally be asked and directed to help make computer engineer Barbie better. You'll be asked to help Barbie be the competent, rock star, independent, badass engineer that she wants to be. Mattel, by the way, eventually pulled this book. This happened 11 years ago, folks, not 40 years ago. Okay, so next slide. So the implicit or unconscious bias, what causes some of this? It results from schemas that we all develop as we move through society. Every one of us participating in this, we all do this, we all have this. Schemas, they're important in terms of how our brain works. They help us filter information. We need these schemas for filtering to make sense of the deluge of information that we're confronted with daily. We need these schemas to function, but they sometimes lead us to erroneous results, conclusions, and that's what results in the bias. So schemas are necessary to live. Everyone has them. And again, this is important to remember because this is not about blame or shame. Okay, we all do this naturally. We all have schemas for very simple concepts. Unfortunately, they can cause us to miss or misinterpret certain things. That's what leads us to the unconscious bias. Next slide. So this diagram helps to illustrate how these biases are already circulating in society at large. And individuals encounter them. We all encounter these things in a variety of contexts before we enter the workplace or organizations. We then bring these biases with us into our cultures, and they subtly shape the culture in 2 ways. Through subtle dynamics. These are small, subtle interactions that happen every day between a couple of people, but they can add up over time. And institutional barriers. These are the larger processes or systems that become embedded in just simply how an organization does things. Okay, so the institutional barriers, they're more systemic. They become embedded, hard-coded into organizational processes. Examples of some of these are job descriptions, performance management processes, promotions, out-of-work bonding. And there's many other examples, but those can become institutional barriers. Subtle dynamics may become institutional barriers if they become encoded. So you might have subtle biases in task assignment here and there every now and then, but the more it persists, the more pervasive it becomes, it can lead to becoming institutionalized and becoming a barrier. Okay, next slide. So now that we know that biases play themselves out in a couple of ways, these two ways, let's take a deeper dive into some of these subtle biases. I want to give you just a couple of examples, and then we'll get to our panel here in just a moment. 4 types of subtle biases are micro inequities. Micro inequities, very well named. Subtle, cumulative, repeated negative message that can devalue, they can degrade and discourage a person, which will eventually impair performance. An example of that is frequently mispronouncing someone's name. The message we hear over time is you don't care about me enough to learn my name. Stereotype threat, that's a second type of a subtle bias. And this is really the fear or the anxiety that we have that our actions will confirm negative stereotypes about an identity group to which we belong, based on like our gender, race, or age, for example. A classic example of this, and this has actually been said to me twice in my career, believe it or not. Great job, Heidi. You're living proof that women are great leaders and really do have great technical minds. Seriously, I've been told that twice in my career, to which I responded, thank you. Tokenism, this is another one of the biases. And this occurs when only a few employees belong to a group, an identity group, but they're singled out repeatedly to represent or relate to that group. Another personal example of that, Heidi, we're so excited to have you on the team. We've really needed someone like you to help us understand the LGBTQ community. Yes, I'm gay. No, I do not speak for all gay people in Michigan, in America, or in the world. I am simply Heidi. Why would you think I would speak for all gay women in tech? I don't. Okay, so that's an example of tokenism. And then finally, and this has been more and more prevalent, I'd be surprised if all of us hadn't seen this happen somewhere recently. And this subtle bias is gender or color invisibility. We often make very well-intentioned assertions in an effort to combat prejudice and treat employees equitably. And I'd be surprised if you haven't heard this said. I don't see color or gender. Do your work well on my team and you'll succeed. Very well intentioned, but the message is, I don't see you. I don't see you for who you are. That is a very degrading subtle bias. And again, I think we've been seeing that more and more frequently in recent years. So with that brief overview around subtle bias, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from our distinguished panel. Gentlemen, are you ready? Okay. The goal here, what we're going to do, there's a series of questions on the screen. Next slide. There's 9 scenarios, and we're going to discuss and learn practical things that you can do, that each of us can do, male, female, non-binary, things we might do, how we might intervene when we observe one of these situations. So we're going to start with the upper left-hand corner, and Rich is going to kick us off. Rich, what can you tell us about that first scenario?
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Well, let me just read it first. In the hall, a colleague mentions Ramira has potential if only she could learn to tone it down a bit and not be so abrasive. So you may or may not have experienced this directly, because this is kind of, secondhand hearsay that, someone is saying about somebody else. But I can tell you, I've experienced that, in the career that I had a number of times, where someone would effectively say, I really appreciate this person, but they're never gonna move ahead because they don't know how to interact with other people. So kind of one of my things to say would be, when you want to be an ally and sort of an advocate for somebody, I think it's easier if you are able to, rather than just contradict someone and say that they're wrong, that kind of just cements the idea in people's mind, get them to kind of see it from a different perspective, maybe see it from your perspective. And so how I would handle it and how I've had to handle it in the past is I would say, I do agree with you. Ramira has a lot of potential, right? She's got a lot of capability and, she could go far in the organization. But you have to realize too, that people, are different and they operate differently. And those differences actually are a benefit to our workplace and, the way that we interact with each other. So, keep that in mind. And, it's always important to respect and, sort of recognize people's contributions to the organization because, everybody contributes in different ways and all of those ways are important. And then the kind of the last thing I think I would say is, if you really believe that this is, an impediment for Ramira, you really believe that she has something that needs to be worked on or corrected, why don't you constructively approach her, offer to help her, provide coaching feedback in a way that is, useful for her, because, that would demonstrate that you're actually believe she has potential and you actually want to make a difference in her career and make a difference maybe in her life. So I think walk them through sort of a thought process about how they could come to see it a different way.
Thank you for that, Rich. Excellent, excellent. That resonated with me very much so. Let's move to the next one. Ryan, you're up. Second box.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So the second one is, you notice that someone is repeatedly interrupted in a meeting. And the way that I would maybe try to think about some of these things is maybe with a couple criteria at least. And I'm sure my colleagues would have more here of what they would suggest. But one is to think about, who do you need to send a message to, right? Does the message need to be sent to just a person or a second person, or is it a message that's applicable to a broader group? And I think secondarily is then, how powerfully do you need to send that message? Could you send it more subtly, or do you need to make it to be overt? And so what at least that I would do in this type of meeting, if someone's repeatedly interrupted, if they're by one person, or even if they're by a group, what I would typically say is something to the effect of, I don't know that I'm fully understanding this person's perspective, and I would really like to hear them out fully, right? In order for us to be able to do that. And then we could take an input, or we could provide some feedback on how to make the idea better. And I think it's a little bit of that mindset of the and culture versus the or the but culture, right? So I would also do something to be able to ask the group of, let's think about this and what could be additive to this to make this idea be even more successful. So I would work to drive it in that direction. Again, you could change the powerfulness of that message depending on how frequently it's happening and who's doing it. And if you need to, of course, you could always have a follow-up after you would make, even if it's a subtle point in the meeting, to have a discussion with those one or two people, or however many it is, just to be able to go through and say, this is a pattern that I'm identifying. I'm a really big believer in patterns, and everyone's got patterns. I've got patterns just like the rest of the group. So I think when you see that, right, and you see that continually happen, you can say something to the effect of, I'm noticing a pattern. And it's something that I wanted to bring up to you as you work through. And I think both of those are ways to really be able to get the message across and have it be effective for that audience.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. That was fantastic. I really love that comment, and culture versus the but culture. The yes and. That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. Mike, let's move to the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So to read the card, the third card, you hear someone coach a colleague on how to get ahead, encouraging her to take it low and slow, meaning to lower her voice and speak more slowly. So this can come from, in this context, there can be many possibilities for where this advice is coming from. This kind of piggybacks off of Rich's card, where there could be some coaching done here depending on what the communication is, but it's hard to know exactly where that advice is coming from, because it very well could be impacted by implicit bias unbeknownst to both parties. So the best way just to know for sure is to ask questions. The key to eliminating implicit bias is that it's sneaky, it's below consciousness. So asking those questions will help bring it to light. So this is where I might start with the person who dispensed the coaching and just ask questions, trying to come in from a point of understanding, saying, maybe pull them aside individually and ask them, hey, I heard you give, my colleague that coaching, how to talk low and slow. I'm curious just for my own coaching of others, why do you think it's important for her to speak low and slow? And then just see what the response is to that. Some other questions I can think of. Do you feel like you give others similar coaching advice? And then something to think about with the answers they give. Is there a particular pattern in the people that they dispense that communication advice to, right? And those questions will reveal where that advice is coming from. And then hopefully in their answers, they'll start to see that bias of their own, because they have to think about when they're saying low and slow, what is that standard of communication that they have? And then how is that standard impacted by that implicit bias? So that's on that side. And then from, if you want to take the allyship a step further, talking to that person who received the coaching, the colleague, and asking her, hey, just wanted to see how that coaching landed. Did you see that to be effective? And that's where they can you're giving them permission to share whether it landed, whether it wasn't. And it's basically up to them to say, no, I didn't think that was effective because of X, Y, or Z. Or, oh, yeah, it was effective because it resonated. And then boom. But at least you made the platform and you gave both parties an opportunity to be understood.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic, Mike. Part of what I heard you say was seek to understand, not to be understood. That's a great starting point for when we encounter bias, how to interrupt it. Just ask a few questions, seek to understand more. Excellent feedback. Okay. We're on to our next question. Sangy, are you ready?
Yes, Heidi. So I'll read the card first. Now you're sponsoring an employee who is unsure whether or not they should take on a risky assignment. And as I read this card, I actually was reflecting on an example that when this happened. And a few years ago, I was looking to fill a role on my leadership team to hire a divisional CIO. And as I looked at that opportunity, what was needed, and I started to look at the candidate list. Somebody recommended a person to me, and this is an individual that I had been observing from a distance in the company, and the role was supposed to be a very technically oriented role, as many of these roles are. And I started to hear about this person, and everybody would say this person has high trust, highly engaging, great institutional knowledge, gets the job done, wonderful at relationship building. But, and then came the but, and the but was the person doesn't have a strong technical background. And so this actually went on. So I'm actually talking to multiple people, and I hear about all the positive aspects, all the strong traits that you would need in a leader. And this was a very critical division of the company. And so I decided to speak with the person, and I had known the person before, but I was not thinking about the person for this role. That was my own bias. I also made some assumptions. So I met with the person and we had a conversation, and I said, what's your level of interest in this role? And the person actually went through talking about, first actually started with, I don't have a technical background, or I don't have as strong of a technical background as many of my peers would have on your leadership team. And then the person started talking about the background on everything else, right? And it was like a very, very strong positive aspect of things that I gathered. And so we had a conversation. I asked about, I said, what's your interest in the role? She said that the interest is very high, but I don't think I'm qualified for this one reason. So we spent some more time, and I said, how would you change this statement without using but?
Beautiful.
And this person actually talked about, all the strengths and said, and I would like to learn more about tech. And that led to, I actually delayed the hiring process on that role because I wanted to spend some time with this person. So it took an extra 30 days, delayed the fulfillment of the role. wanted to understand more about the person, and we set up a cadence a couple times in a week. And I'll just fast forward to the point that this person went through the proper due diligence process, as we would do for any critical role like that, and came out to be the strongest amongst all the other individuals. And there were other traits that we were looking at as well. But the thing that really got my attention was her willingness to commit and looking for somebody who will give her that level of sponsorship. And so I would say my role was minimal. This person did most of the heavy lifting, transformed her own articulation of her positioning for this role. And I would say, other than in the early stages being more available for her to kind of step in when needed, and only stepping in when needed, she started flying and basically evolved into a very strong tech leader. So.
Wow, that's a fantastic story. That just warms my heart. And that's just a great example of how sometimes people just need a little encouragement. So I'm going to share one other little data point about what the research tells us. Men and women are different. We're raised differently, and that's where some of this bias comes from. But this test has been repeated multiple times over the years. If there are 10 requirements, skills or requirements, responsibilities in a job description, if a woman does not have most of them, and by most I mean 8, 9, or 10, the female will generally not apply. If the male has 4 or 5 of them, they will generally apply. And again, this test has been repeated hundreds of times, okay? And that's why, okay, all other things being equal, okay, and that's why sometimes we just need to provide that encouragement and support, okay? And this goes all the way back to from how we're taught how to ride a bicycle, okay? In general, most of us in the cultures we're raised in general, you know, parents are more protective, okay, of their female offspring. And not saying they don't protect their little boys, but they go to great extremes to not let their daughter scrape their knee, where it's okay for the son to scrape their knee and get up and go back again. And that's important because the research tells us, and there's been much written about this in this book, The Confidence Code, which I would encourage everyone to read if you want to learn more about this. But it's by falling down that we learn how to get up. And it's by falling down that we learn how to get up. We get stronger. We go back. We build resilience, and it's through that resilience that we build confidence. Coincidentally, because of that, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the data today, the majority of female CEOs across all industries, not just CIOs, but the majority of females, majority of female CEOs have a background in sports. Today it's college sports. And that's a place where girls and women learn how to fall down, okay? How to, in my case, I played volleyball, how to crack your chin open on the gym floor, how to sprain your ankle, how to get back up and run the stadium stairs and go back on the court and jump again. That's how we build resilience, and that's how strength and resilience and confidence. So great example. What a wonderful story. And just that encouragement in just a changing of a few words can make such a big impact. You had a major impact on this person's life. Thank you. Question 5. Rich, let's go back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. This one says, you see someone getting credit for something another colleague said earlier in the meeting, and I suspect everyone that's on this call has probably heard this, a couple times. It's very similar to the one that Mike answered above it around, being interrupted, right? It boils down to how people are treated and the dynamics of a meeting where a number of different people are in the room, and sometimes it's easier there for a person to say or do something that isn't one-on-one and kind of get away with it, if you know what I mean. Step on somebody else when they're speaking, interrupt them, take credit for something that happened. Sometimes, I honestly believe people don't even really recognize they're doing it. They just expect that that's kind of the way that the world works, right? And it's just expected for people to step on each other, and I mean, not in, really step on it, but, and, effectively jump in, out of turn, or sort of take credit for something that they didn't really do. So the way I would answer this one's actually pretty simple. I would basically say, when the second person came up with the idea and they finished speaking, I would say, thanks for reinforcing the point that the previous speaker put together, right? It lends credence to the fact that this is really a good idea. And, obviously if there's something you want to add on to that to reinforce that the idea is a good idea, maybe there's something you could add as a betterment to the idea, that's fine too. But, you got to do this kind of stuff consistently. It is kind of the trick that I've noticed, because it's a pattern. It's a pattern in the way that meetings work in workplaces. It's a pattern in the way that people express themselves in meetings. And so you can't just, let it go. If you let it go, even one instance, right, it creates sort of an invitation for people to continue to do that stuff. So, you can be patient, you can be polite, and you can wait for the right time to have the conversation, but you should do that. And obviously, if it's a single person, that's doing this a lot, as Mike mentioned, it's good to have a one-on-one conversation with them and just say, look, you may not notice that you're doing this, but it's very apparent to me that it's a consistent pattern. And, I think it's something you need to work on. It's not something that's the right sort of behavior in meetings that we have at this place of business.
Great tips there. Thank you so much for that, Rich. Must do this stuff consistently. And that becomes the things that we do consistently over time become how we work. They become the culture. And what a great way to build the culture that you want your organization to have, that you need to be successful. Let's go on to the next question. Mike.
Oh, sure, Heidi. So card 6, I suppose. This one is, while standing at the buffet at a company catered event, you overhear someone ask a colleague of color for more coffee. Heidi talked about personality penalties in the beginning of this Lunch and Learn. I see those akin to microaggressions. And again, the possibilities for where this is coming from can be endless. But for the person receiving it, it can be a cut. And a small cut, one that has been added up over time, right? Because if I see this happen and I'm not thinking about the impact of race in this scenario, I might not think anything of it. But the person subject to this, my colleague, may have this happen more often than I think. So again, the goal here is not to, like we said before, is not to try and create conflict. It's to understand and to create connection, to help bring the bias to light. So if I saw this happen, something, again, I would do is ask questions. When I saw that person ask my colleague for coffee, I'd find an opportunity, again, individually, you want to call this out privately. And again, not a call out, but a question. Hey, I noticed you asked, this person for coffee. I was just curious to learn, why you asked them and maybe not the wait staff or someone else. And they might tell you, this person's offered to give me coffee and very well not the product of bias. But if not that, their answer would hopefully surface like some kind of awareness of, oh, I'm not really sure why I asked that person of color for coffee specifically out of, this room of people, however many people it is at this event. So, and again, the questions just help bring the answers or bring the bias to light. And that's where, like, if they can walk away from the interaction with just that awareness of that having happened, and then they walk away with more consideration around the next time they ask someone for coffee, like that's allyship. Like that is the impact of at least progress being made to make lives easier for others. And again, as far as the colleague of color is concerned, there might be a risk of a microaggression occurring here. So you want to be someone who tends to that micro cut, because it could be a micro cut on top of 1,000 others. So I'd talk to that person, again, give them the platform, ask the question, but not have it be loaded. Hey, I just noticed that person asked you for coffee. I was just wondering, why that was. And then you give them permission to share, because it may even be a microaggression, but guess what? They don't want to tell you because it's their own thing to own. So give them the platform. They can share with you or not, but at least you see that it was something warranting the question, and you gave them a platform to express themselves, which again, boom, that's, in my opinion, that's what allyship's about.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you for that, walking us through that from a couple of different perspectives. I'm sure others have noticed this, but there's a theme emerging in almost all the different examples that the panelists have talked about so far. Several things are in common. One of those things is you've all recognized creating psychological safety. Okay, to have some of these conversations, you have to have some common sense, use some common sense, but you've got to make it safe for these conversations to occur, and really appreciate the importance of that. Really appreciate that you've all talked about it from that perspective. We're on to question 7, and Ryan, we're back to you.
Sounds good. So this one says, you recommend an employee you're sponsoring for an opportunity, but get the response, we're not sure she's the right fit. She's not a natural leader. And as I thought about this, there was a few things that stuck out to me as part of this. The first is that everybody's going, what the heck does a natural leader mean, right? But I think the other things that have to come into here are thinking about, number one, this is an employee you're sponsoring. So there is likely a positive feeling that you have about this person, right? So it would make it a little bit more personal. And I think as we think about this, I could maybe have you walk away, at least from my side, a couple things to think about. I think in this type of situation, the first thing that you have to do, and I continue to try to improve myself on this every day openly, is you need to respond and you need not to react. So respond, don't react. And I think in this case, questions and being inquisitive are really your friend here. And I would start out, the way I would think about my questions, I would start out with something that's broad to allow yourself to then narrow in as needed. And so let me give an example. So if this were brought to me, I would have to first take out the emotion that this person have, and I have some sort of a connection. But the second is that I would probably first ask the question to say, and you have to ask it in a really inquisitive way, not in a pointed way, right? Help me understand. I don't know if I could describe what is a natural leader. Could you help me understand what you think is a natural leader, right? How would you describe that? And then I would start to go through, and if they provided right and they didn't start to catch where you were going, right, start to go through and say, well, what makes this person, help me understand. Maybe there's a point of view that I don't have that would say that, what makes this person not be that natural leader? What have you seen? Help me understand, right? And then I think and then you could start to get into and say, well, here's what I understand the fit of the role to be, but then I'm hearing you say something either aligned or not aligned about being what a natural leader is, right? For how do you do that? And I think you could continue to dive into questions, and you could get further, right? So you could get to the point that you say, well, it's kind of interesting to me because what I hear us saying here is similar to what happened with this other person. And I'm just wondering what happened in this case versus what's different in this case. So again, ask a lot of questions because that's going to help you get to a response differently, right? And then at a later point, I think you would come out to say what your supportiveness of this person is and why are you supportive of that person, right? And why do you see that actually there may be a different point of view than what they're saying? So again, respond, don't react, start out with broad questions, narrow in, and focus less on trying to convince the other person and more trying to draw out what it is and how do you see that there actually may be more similarity than there is difference.
Beautiful answer. You approached all of it. It's not just one thing, right? It's step by step, very thoughtful, okay? And take a step in promoting thinking and ensure the safety is there. But what a thoughtful way to get in there. You know, my key takeaway on that is don't react, respond, don't react. Yeah. I don't know about, I'm guessing none of us like to be called out or put on the spot or put in a corner. We are all people, and we all respond in very human ways when that happens. And it's usually to protect ourselves. And when we get into that mode, we often lose the possibility for learning when we go to our base instincts and go there first. So beautiful answer there. Thank you for that. Looks like let's go to our next question. Question 8. Sangy, we're back to you.
Sure, Heidi, I'll read the card. So
Yep.
work meetings typically include spirited discussion and argument, but Janelle consistently avoids engaging in that manner. Instead, she prefers to respond via email later on. And, you know, as I read this card, I was also kind of listening to my panel peers and your point about the psychological safety. You know, Rich made the point about being consistent. You know, Mike talked about asking questions, and then Ryan was talking about basically setting the tone. And I was thinking about it, and again, sometimes, you know, best things come to mind. You think of real examples, and this is another leader in the organization who was part of my leadership team, not the one I talked about in the previous example. And I had started to notice that in the meetings, in our weekly leadership meetings, this person would not be contributing much, would not be asking questions or contributing to when I was asking about, you know, what else should we be thinking of doing. And you know, as we said, and you had shared the slide earlier, is that we all go through the journey of overcoming our biases. And the first bias kicked in was that, did I make the right call to hire this person? And it was unfortunate for me to think that way at the time, but that's what came to mind. And by the way, just as a quick background, this person I had gotten to know this person because when this leadership role became available, I had talked to her for some other role 6 months earlier. And when we talk about having broader and diverse slates, there's a practical value in that. And this person had applied for some other role, which somebody else got because they had a stronger fit. But I had gotten to know the person. And I thought this person could be a strong fit elsewhere when some other opportunity comes up. So fast forward that, you know, this person took the role. And so I, in my one-on-one, asked the person about, you know, you got strong background, but I'm not getting you to engage in these meetings. As a result, I'm missing input from you. And the person said, you know what, it's 80-20. So her bold response to me in a one-on-one setting was that it's a 80-20, that 80% of the discussion is typically done by 20% of your direct reports. And I thought that's an awesome insight. It's a great insight, and people stepping in and grabbing the podium and then staying on the podium for longer than they should. And so coming back to, I think, a few things that we talked about, and then I asked her thoughts about a couple of the topics we had recently discussed. And she had some deep insights, some very, very high value things that we could say, oh, by the way, that you would have spoken about this in the meeting, this would have been prioritized much higher than what we, say, for example, decided to go with. And we were able to make the adjustments. So what led to, by asking questions and then kind of setting the tone, was to really come to the next meeting and set this expectation that we would be looking to have 100% of the people contributing. And you pick your channel of choice. Either you do it in this meeting, you do it in a one-on-one, you do it through email, you do it through your chat. But everybody's input is needed. And if that means that we delay some decisions by 2 days a week, that's fine. And to me, I think that was a significant learning for me when I really talk to this person one-on-one. It opened up a lot of aspects to me that I would have assumed, and was very, very helpful to see this individual grow rapidly to the point the person, once they saw that there was an equal opening on the stage, to be able to contribute very visibly, very hands-on. So that was just one of those learnings, and also a great outcome there.
Wow. Oh, what another great story. Thank you so much for that. What a fabulous insight. I love that data point that you shared in that story about that 80-20. Who's dominating the conversation, who's speaking in terms of the directs versus arrested people. Very interesting insight. Thank you all panelists. What I'd like to do now, I realize there's one more question, but we'd like to hear from the audience. What questions would you like to address? Is there a scenario that you'd like the panelists to talk about? And please use the chat channel for that. No specific scenarios? Any further commentary? Something you'd like to hear a little bit more about?
Maybe if I could just add one thing. I thought
Please.
Sangy's stories were great earlier. Some of these are about, a lot of these are about people, right? And how people view another person. And sometimes the person having the self-confidence to do things on their own. Maybe one thing that I tend to think about is that people will naturally go through more growth in the first 3 to 6 months of a new role than they will likely in the next 2 years in that role. And so I think making sure that as you talk about transitions, someone you're supporting, how do you do that? That there's a big offerings of support that you could do, or an interest in how can you help that person successfully navigate if they have that potential. But just think about, depending on which side that you're on, whether you're the sponsor of that person, whether you are listening in the room, whether you have no stake in it at all, right? That you go through and you just try to understand what is it that either you or the organization could do to be most supportive of that person to help them excel in where they're trying to go. So just a little add-on to the great stuff that Sangy had spoken about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. And Heidi, there was one other thought when Rich was talking about the credit. There's an interesting thing I had read was that when they had done a study, one of the recent studies, 90% of the men had reported that they had given the credit to the woman who was in that scenario. But when you talk to the women population during the same study, in the same time frame, they reported 40% of the men had given the credit. And I know this is men learning from men also to help women in tech. Is the aspect that sometimes being called an ally versus I would say maybe just hear that and put that on the side, and then maybe more important to act on it on a daily basis. Is that how are you building that mutual respect to the person that you're helping, that you're sponsoring, and not get too preoccupied with the word ally. And then the other piece there is that in the spotlight, you play a quarterback role. You're talking about sports, so I'll use a quarterback analogy there, but it's playing the quarterback role, and then I've seen that happen when somebody sponsored me in the past. They've taken a quarterback role and they put the spotlight on me. And I think as we are in these roles to help out others, taking a quarterback role and letting the spotlight be on others, and stepping in when you truly need to step in, was one of the learnings. I appreciate it.
It's great feedback. We got a few questions in here, Heidi. I don't know if open it up to the group here, but first one, at least that I'm seeing, is Allison, that said, in most of the scenarios we've talked about how to approach the aggressor. How do you tend to approach the person that is on the receiving end to show support and action to change? Maybe that we just quickly open it up. I know we only have a few minutes left, but maybe if you're okay, we could just try to hit on a couple of these real quick and gain some input.
That's what we're doing right now. Thank you, Ryan.
Perfect. So,
Yes,
so
perfect.
feel free to jump in, anybody, on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think on the first one, I would just say, this is Rich here. I would just say that, you know, it is important to talk to the person who, you know, maybe is experiencing the bias, right? Because as you pointed out, Heidi, there's the, you know, the micro cuts that could happen forever. And maybe you can help, you know, make it not such a, you know, feel like it's a pattern that's going to continue forever and nobody's noticing and nobody's paying attention to that. So just having a conversation and saying, you know, I noticed somebody who's really interrupting you a lot in the last meeting, you know, we'll have to work on a way to make that not happen in the future. It's just not the way to do business, right? So I think it is important to approach the person that has had something happen to them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep it quick because we're running out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just about the top of the hour. We will find a way to get, there's a couple of other questions in here. We do not have time to address them all, okay? I do believe we have a hard stop with this. Great questions. We'll make an attempt to get some answers out to the folks to address those. What I do want to say is thank you, panelists. Amazing insights that you've shared with the group this afternoon. And my top takeaway was certainly help bring bias to the light. Every one of the scenarios, the way everyone engaged in the responses, you talked about it, do it in a way to help. This is unconscious bias. Part of this effort is to help bring it to light. How do we do that in safe ways to bring it to light? It's when we bring it to light that we can begin to change it. So that was just amazing. Just a couple of quick slides to wrap up here. I just want to remind everyone, the minority groups are not broken. Our biases are the problem. And we are going to include a recording of this will be available. I do believe these slides will be available as well. Please look at the slides. We don't have time to go through them all right now. But if you could advance through the slides, Aisha, please. We have included some tips for how to interrupt biases. We call it bias busting. And I want to really close by asking you a question. And if we can advance the slides, I don't have control over the deck. But I have a call to action for everyone. And that call to action is I want you to think about, what are you willing to do? What have you learned? How are you going to practice interrupting bias if you observe it in the work environment? What we do know is that it's essential that we learn how to do this. Bystanders, people that observe unconscious bias and subtle bias, people that observe some of these macro inequities are more likely to respond if they know what to do. So we need to practice this, and that's why these tips are just amazing for all of us. So thank you again to the amazing panelists for your participation, for everyone that joined us. We absolutely need the community creating technology to be as diverse as the community consuming it, and working together, we can change what is possible. We can eliminate these institutional barriers. We can make Michigan the #1 state for women in tech, and that's what MCWT is all about. We are past the hour. Tammy, I want to turn things over to you. We do have there is a survey. The link is provided in the chat window. And Tammy, can you provide some guidance on that?
Yes, actually, Nathan, I sent you the link. Are you able to put that in, or do you need me to do so?
Yep, I can put that in. And for those of you who want to grab the summary points as well, I put those in so you can grab those and copy them and keep those for your own notes. And I will post that chat right now.
And we will send So Heidi, I apologize. Aisha got kicked out of the meeting, which is why she was unable to advance the slides for you. But we will send out a copy of the slide deck as well as a link to the survey and everything as a follow-up to this meeting. So I know we're past time and I don't want to hold anybody up. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to our wonderful panelists and moderator. You guys were so insightful and wonderful. So thank you for taking the time, and we really appreciate you. And thank you to all of you who joined. We hope that you are able to take this very practical information and start applying it in your day-to-day experience.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great
Thanks,
day,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Heidi.
Go Lions.
Bye.
Yes. Aisha, if you're back in, can you stop the recording? Oh, Aisha, are you there?
I'm here, Kim.
Yeah. Can you pause the recording?
Yep.